welcome back to the Mentoring Men Live Conversations. I'm your host, Charlie McKeever. Joining me today, right next to me, is Mr. Dennis Collins.
Howdy, hey.
Also joining us is Mr. Sven Masterson.
Hey, guys.
And today we're going to continue a little bit our conversation from last week. Our topic for today is disowning yourself, all the different ways that we can disown ourselves. We'll talk about what that means, what it means to us personally. We'll talk about what it means to our marriage, to our relationships. And just for a little context, last week we were saying that, if you have a front end alignment on your car that's out of alignment, then it erodes your tires. It wears your tires. It causes problems. So avoiding or neglecting or not really addressing an issue doesn't make it go away. In fact, it starts to show up in other areas of your life in different ways that then need to be addressed. It's kind of compounding the problem. So today's discussion about disowning yourself builds on that. And so who wants to kick us off? Sven, you got any thoughts about this?
I have a lot of thoughts, probably decades of thoughts. But yeah, the word disown is weird. It's not like a thing I'm accustomed to using in my speech every day.
Mm-hmm.
And when I was a kid, like we would say, or my parents would joke around about disowning us, or like that was the number one place I heard the term was being disowned. Mostly from a parental figure, but I love the word. So I'll put it back to you. Like, what do you think is a good, working man's definition of disowning yourself? Like,
yeah, that's going to be important for the conversation, right? So anytime that we're disowning ourselves, we are basically identifying some part of ourselves that is bad, some part of ourselves that's not good, some part of ourselves that we shy away from in order to maybe to cope, to please someone else, in order to get along, right? And for me, this concept came on my radar when I was reading Embracing Your Inner Critic. Embracing Your Inner Critic, in that book, they talk a lot about the fact that we disown our parts of ourselves. And that really intrigued me because I know that when we're born, we're kind of this blank canvas, this clean slate. And at some point, we start to recognize that we start to have differentiation, right? We start to have a point in our development where we recognize that we're separate from, right? That we're not the same. That if you want to characterize it or think of it this way, you kind of came out of your mother, but you are not your mother, right? You're a separate being. And at some point, we go from truly being connected to this person to being independent. And you'll see it in 2-year-olds. Some people will call it the terrible twos, where we start to say no, right? We start to assert ourselves
to everything,
right? Because we're trying to figure out where the boundaries are. And a lot of times parents will get upset by that because it seems very disobedient. It seems like a conflict between wills. And what we're really trying to do is assert ourselves. Now, as we grow, we start to also observe, interpret, and assign meaning to things. We start to see how others are treated. We start to have experiences of our own. But children are excellent receptors, but poor interpreters, meaning we take in a lot of information, but we don't have a lot of experience, a lot of context to understand what things mean. And because we're trying to figure out how to survive in the world, we sometimes will come up with incorrect assignment of meaning for things. We'll just say, and then we'll actually start to recognize that there's certain things that we're not supposed to do, or that we shouldn't do, or we tell ourselves that we can't do, because it makes somebody else upset, right? A lot of times the first people in our lives that get upset at us are mommy and daddy. When I do this, mommy gets upset. When I do that, daddy gets upset. I also observe mommy getting upset at daddy, and vice versa. I might observe friends. I might observe the family cat, right? I might observe siblings and start to make associations, a set of operating instructions for ourselves, if you will, maybe a line of code, right? Some rules that we govern ourselves by. And this becomes breeding ground for disowning ourselves. So I know for myself, in this conversation, I've got a couple of stories that I want to share, but I'm interested in hearing what you guys have to say with that definition in place.
The other thing that comes up in me is when we disown ourselves, we are not being authentic.
Mm. Mm.
Because we're saying, I am not good, so I will behave or pretend or do this, go along to get along. So, and we know as men, if we're not authentic, we're less trustable.
Yeah.
And you made me think of when they took me to the orphan home. That would be my first disowning experience. I colored in all the grout with crayons in the bathroom. I don't remember how old I was. Got my ass beat, got put in the car to be taken to Mount Loretto, where you took kids that didn't have parents and families. Now, my parents did a pretty good job as parents. Driving me all the way there and pulling up was a little bit overkill.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Holy crap. Yeah. And I wasn't one to draw a lot anyhow, so believe me, nothing ever I never made another mark on a wall the rest of my life.
I can imagine.
Why can't I draw?
Imagine the child trying to make sense of all of this and saying, "Oh, I drew something that resulted in this uncomfortable experience, right? This traumatic experience. I probably don't want to go like testing that again. I probably don't want to color again. I'm not sure if it was the coloring. I'm not sure what it was, but I'm certainly not willing to go there and try to experience that discomfort again."
And both of my sisters had a little bit of artistic talent. My older sister actually had some skills. It's funny when Sven will write and draw up things. I'm always like, yeah, I can't do that because I do it. And it's true. I'm left-handed too, so it looks like crap sometimes. I can't even read my own handwriting. And I go, never thought about it until today. Right now, I'm like, geez, I think there might be a reason why I've never even bothered to draw because, I just remember being in the station wagon. And I think it was the silver one.
I think a lot of guys are like this about tools and DIY and being handy. I think if you were to peer behind the curtains for a lot of men, they had maybe early experiences with doing, mechanical hands-on things in which they were shouted out or felt shame, and they disowned themselves. Like I would define, Charlie, just to kind of summarize some of the things you said, that disowning is just an area of myself I have not accepted as being pleasing to the world around me, and therefore rejectable. And it's not like we walk around with this firm inventory where we know exactly where we rejected ourselves. It actually is relatively unknown to us, but we would say your emotions are telling you about areas you've disowned yourself quite significantly. Now we could talk about that a little bit more in the call, but the concept of disowning is just like, I like to think about it. We used the metaphor last night in our Renewed Masculine Man call about having maybe a mansion with 1,000 rooms, and like 700 of them over time, you've closed the door and said, nothing good is in there. Now that's one way. I've been thinking about it lately because I'm trying to think of some visual metaphors I could use with retreats and videos. And I've been thinking about a jigsaw puzzle. Imagine you're a jigsaw puzzle, and at some point you picked up a piece along the way as a kid, and you're like, that doesn't fit, and you set it aside, or you rejected it, or you crossed it out, right? And so then you go to put the piece together, the puzzle together, which I think is what every human is ultimately on a journey of trying to understand who they are. But all these pieces you reject because different experiences presented to you with a moment where you were like, Charlie, this piece is bad. And you agreed with it because in your immaturity, you didn't know it. So I think anywhere you find disowning, you find this concept of an agreement that we make in whatever level of maturity we have. Well, what I've noticed in my own life and why we talk about disowning, why I like to talk about it, is all of the puzzle pieces I reject, I have found over the years that I've tried to get other people to fill those puzzle pieces in. Like basically, let's just say I have like 700 pieces missing, that I'll go to great lengths to get other people to tell me what should be in that spot. And you could say, it might be fair to say, that's kind of how we build the ego. We build the ego, which is like a structure we put in those blank spaces that we're like, how about this? Is this acceptable? Do you like this? The problem is your dad might like one thing in that spot. Your mom might like another, your peers, God forbid you get to junior high and it's just a total cluster with all of these empty spaces. You start to feel the anxiety of like, I don't know how to put the right things in this box. I'm of the age, and Charlie, you might be also, when, do you remember like Benetton shirts and the Coca-Cola shirts that were really popular in the 80s? And there was like, well, to fill that space, I have to have these clothes. I have to have this fashion. I have to have this physique, and this is during like the time we're transitioning from pre-puberty to being a pubescent teenager. And it's just the anxiety of all these parts of you that you're looking at and saying, oh, this won't do, right? God forbid you have acne, crooked teeth, that you're in any way abnormal feeling, and suddenly you've rejected just huge swaths of yourself. Well, what we don't realize is all that stuff sets in there. It's like fast, dry concrete. You reject it, you move on, and years later, you show up in a community or with men like us wondering why you feel so tortured by your spouse's actions or lack of actions. And she says something like, I need space, not sure I love you anymore. I love you, but I'm not in love with you. Or she says, I'm having an affair, and your world crumbles because she's holding all those pieces that you disowned.
Well, just while you're right there, Sven, imagine, right? It's not hard to imagine. Imagine, because every man who shows up at the community says what, right? I want connection. I want intimacy. I want love. I want a relationship, a good, healthy relationship with my wife, right? That you just described something where he wants acceptance. He wants to be accepted and appreciated and admired, right, by his wife.
Right.
Now he's disowned himself, right? He's rejected. I like that word. Rejected part of himself, and he's wanting to be known. He's wanting to be seen, right? He's wanting to be understood. He's wanting to be connected,
approved,
approved, right, in his relationship. But he has disowned. Another word, rejected. He has not accepted, right? He has said there's parts of him that are not good, right? He's in many ways he's not whole because there's all these pieces and parts that he's disconnected from himself.
Can I add something there? We've actually normalized this. If you look at Maslow's hierarchy, it actually ceremonializes that truth as saying like you have a need for the acceptance of others, I wholeheartedly reject that concept. I love Maslow's hierarchy, but what I've noticed in my own life, and it took me, 40 plus years to get to this spot, but I have since helped a number of other men, and this is what we do, is that when you accept yourself fully, when you go through the process of understanding what you have disowned, and you re-inhabit or re-own, take ownership of those places, and you offer yourself that acceptance, that approval, that validation, that love, you don't need a soul in the world to feel those things about you. Now, it's great if they do, but it's totally not necessary. And the paradox of all that, and we could talk about this too, because it's really interesting, is I didn't feel like anybody in the world accepted me until that happened first. And then after that happened, I noticed, like, in this weird kind of magic way, everybody around me started to relate to me differently. I did not change a thing in how I was towards them. Well, that's probably not, I probably did, and I didn't know it. What went away was all of my, what Greg Bear calls my getting and protecting behaviors, trying to protect those places I disowned. But once all that went away, I felt like truly free.
Yeah.
And
Internally aligned.
Well, and here's the thing. I like that you said internally aligned, right? Because we were saying earlier that when we're misaligned, right, when we have a front end alignment that's out, that we wear the tires, right? So when we're rejecting part of ourselves, we're disowning part of ourselves, not in alignment with our, right, not whole. We are eroding our sense of self, right? We're eroding our self-trust, our self-respect, our self-confidence, our self-reliance, all the healthy senses of self. The other thing is that because we are doing all of that, right, eroding our sense of self, we're also simultaneously not valuing ourself, right? Not understanding our value, not understanding our worth. So now what you've just described, right, is this place where I don't believe these things about myself, right? I don't believe that I'm good. I don't believe that I'm whole. I don't believe that I'm valuable or worthy. And so now I need to go around and find external signs of it in other people,
yeah.
circumstances, jobs, whatever it is, right? Relationships, signs outside of me that demonstrate to me that I'm worthy, that I'm valuable, that I'm okay. However, the insidious part is because I don't believe that already about myself, right? What you've just described, right? You didn't believe that about yourself. It's hard for me to wrap my brain around the fact that you find me valuable, that you find
we
me
don't really
worthy.
believe it, even when people say it, right?
People try to give it to us. Our partner will try to give it to us in a variety of different ways, in a way that they understand, right, how to love someone, and we won't accept it. We won't believe it, right? Because partly because we don't believe it about ourselves, but also partly because we're secretly or silently or unconsciously, right, believing that there's some part of us that's not good, part of us that we need to reject. And so even if our wife or partner or whoever's in our life tries to give us what we want, right, what we think that we're missing, then what we do is we say, well, yeah, you say that, but if you really knew how I felt about me, if you really knew what was going on under the hood, you might not say that, right? So we actually devalue what they're trying to give us because we don't believe it.
Yeah, we tear it out. Like, there's no, and that's the problem with seeking validation and affirmation and assurance is it expires really quickly. And for the anxious person, even more so.
It's
like
like
you said,
it's like looking in the mirror and then walking away, right? And then forgetting what you look like. You got to go back and look in the mirror again. You're like, oh yeah, there I am. Oh, yeah.
Shelf life of a ripe avocado.
You keep that's a great one. And everybody knows avocados are never really ripe. They're either pre-ripe or bad, right?
Right.
Yeah, it's like you've already rejected that space within you. And so people can keep telling you, hey, it looks good to me, but they can't overcome your belief that it's not acceptable. But you also just described how what I would call the horse trading of Eros love begins, because now you've got something I need, which is a constant assurance that I'm okay. And you have the same thing. Like you want from me this validation, affirmation, etc. And so now we've just created a commercial relationship where the currency is validation. And this is how most marriages actually form, and they stay in that spot. Not just marriages, by the way, romance, long term. Like, you get a little booster shot of all these wonderful hormones that kind of numb you to the fact you're doing this. And then those wear off, and all you're left with is that currency of validation. And then you're trading it in an economy. In an economy where I earn a certain amount of your approval and validation and value, the belief that I'm valuable, by doing things or not doing things, and you're doing it, in the opposite direction. Now we have to have a ledger, because I'm pretty sure, Charlie, I gave you enough of my time and energy that you should be giving me attention. And so now I've got this ledger, and it becomes a source of contempt, because I'm saying, wait a minute, how many times do I have to keep being like this? And notice I said have to, because have to and no choice language is a great indication you're in this system. So now I'm feeling like I'm obligated to serve you certain things, and you're not actually giving me the ROI.
Yeah.
And then
So the word there is expectation, right? Expectation creeps in, because I'm doing this for you, so therefore you should be doing this for me, right? And when I deem that you haven't, or you haven't done it correctly, then now I'm resentful, right? So expectation leads to resentment, which leads to an erosion of the relationship, right? Of connection and trust.
The nice guy cycle.
And one of this gets really tough. You go to, some marriage counselors, you go to that and they'll say, now tell me how you feel, Charlie, and they'll go to your wife. How do you feel? Oh, Charlie, can you see that Jill is upset? Can you see that? And you're like, well, I'm upset too. And that's when you get in this gridlock, because you got two people who have a ledger of unmet needs. That's what they believe. What their real need is about acceptance and approval within. But because they have moved that outside by disowning themselves, now you're holding onto their needs, and you're being stingy. You won't give them, and you're feeling the same way about them. And now you get in the disillusionment power struggle stage. It's like, well, what do I do now? Where do you go with that? Now you could just go to a counselor who says, well, stop being bitter, stop being contempt, focus only on the good. And, that will serve a purpose. But we've talked to a lot of men. We deal with a lot of men who've been through sometimes decades of counseling. And it's been my observation that that's because the root was never addressed, which is, until you solve the lack of self-acceptance, the person will keep building a ledger again. They'll keep entering this economic relationship where they're trading these intangible needs for each other, and that will ruin your marriage. Almost ruined mine. I'm really fortunate that I kind of had this epiphany before my own marriage completely collapsed, but it was killing my marriage for sure.
Yeah. I want to tell a story to kind of give a man an idea of how these events in his life can kind of contribute to this disowning of self, right? Because, like you said before, we may not be able to always track it back to what it is, what the origin was, right? But more than one thing happened in our life that we could probably point to that either initiated something like this, or maybe built on top of something like this. And if we can start really just becoming aware of the story, if we can become aware of the agreement, right? What it is that we're agreeing to,
Yeah.
and then we can actually start to ask ourselves, now, hang on, wait a minute, is that true? Does that serve me? Do I want to believe that? What
Yeah.
would life be like if I didn't believe that, right? What would be the opposite of that, right? We can really just start to like pick it apart, and we want to become aware of that story every time that it pops up in a multitude of little ways, so that we can just start unraveling that hairball, right? We really start rewriting. We want to create new pathways in our brain, right? A new conduit of better thoughts, right? So
And that's entirely true. Like we know that from neuroscience, we know that from cognitive science, we know that from a number of disciplines, and we know it, of course, anecdotally from our community. But where most men kind of go sideways is they're expecting that this is just going to be like, I just do it once and it's easy, right? But I like to use the example, suppose you grew up in a hometown and you've driven the same path for like 40 years, and you come to a stop sign and you go straight, right? And then suddenly they start building a new road and there's a better way to go. And that new way to go is optimized. Maybe it's a nicer drive. It has less traffic and maybe better road quality. But you have been used to driving down this path for 40 plus years. And it takes time to get used to deliberately choosing to go a new way. And for men and women, anybody who are doing this in their thinking, the first thing they have to know is that there's an intersection where they didn't know there was one. And then they have to learn that I can turn right or left. I don't have to go straight anymore. Right. And that's a time consuming process. But what we find is when men do this, usually in a window of about 6 months, they're feeling differently, because feeling follows thinking, and thinking takes some time to change because we're so good at automating it. That we're machines that are optimized to memorize ways of doing things. And I don't know about you guys, but I drive way better automatically than I do consciously, because my brain is made to do that. My brain, I mean, when we went down to North Carolina, that was like a 9-hour drive for me. I don't remember any of it because I wasn't focused on it consciously. My brain was doing that for me, because our brains are cool this way. But the problem is it's doing that based on things I've learned over, I don't know, 30 years of driving. And when I learned to keep rejecting and disowning, let's just say, some part of my insides, the same thing happens. I've automated just bypassing this part of myself, because I learned early on with this, meat or fat computer in my head. Oh, we don't use that. Oh, we don't touch that. We can't look there. Let's not go there. And you know what brings that to the foreground? Well, let me ask you, what is it that gets a man's attention to those places? Like, what is the catalytic opportunity to kind of disrupt that automation? That's a real question.
Crisis.
There you go. Crisis. Yeah. Conflict opportunity. Yeah. It's pain. Pain is the thing, just like in our physiological lives. If I'm just going through my business, and you guys know this as men that are active, especially with 75 hard, if you've got dysfunction in your body is going to tell you via this thing we call pain. Why do we think that that's any different in our mental, emotional, spiritual insides? I would suggest that kind of pain is telling you the same kind of thing. You have dysfunction here. You have something that does not work as it ought. And if you treat pain like that, you can do great things with it.
well, here's what a man needs to understand is that when we experience a physical pain, right, a nerve ending sends a signal to the brain, and then the brain says, "Hey, something's up," right? Your knee, your elbow, your whatever it is, right? You've fallen down, you've scraped your knee. There's there's signals that are sent to the brain to indicate that something's wrong, and then we pay attention to it, right? We address it. When we experience emotional pain, right, which emotions can be described as energy in motion, right? When we have our feelings about something, and sometimes feelings can be anger, sometimes feelings can be heartache, right? Sometimes feelings can be just tension in our shoulders, tension, butterflies in our stomach. It can be something that we're feeling something, right? A physiological state change. We've got something going on in our body. That's actually there's a feedback mechanism where our brain is sending a signal back to the body, right? When we hurt ourselves in our body, it sends a signal to the brain. But now the brain's saying, "Hey, something's up cognitively, right? I've got a conflict here. I've got something that's distressing to me. It's conflicting." And it starts to send signals back to the body, and we start to feel that in our body. And that's something that's generally uncomfortable, right? Nobody ever complains about cookies or puppies or rainbows, right? It's usually something that's uncomfortable, something that we want to go away, that we want less of. And so sometimes what we'll do is we'll ignore that, right? We'll push it away, we'll push it aside, we'll push it down, we'll reject it, right? We're maybe even continuing to disown our feelings about something because we don't want to face them. We want them to go away as quickly as possible. But I think it was Brene Brown that said, "What we don't deal with, we deal with all the time." Right? So we wind up pushing this away, but it just kind of comes back, like you say, in moments of stress, moments of strain. And it's important to recognize the brain itself, right? The fleshy part doesn't actually have any nerve endings in it, right? This is why you can do brain surgery with the patient awake in a local anesthetic, and you can poke around in that person's brain, and they don't feel that, right? The brain itself doesn't have those nerve endings in it like the rest of our body does.
Well, there's the ignoring strategy, which you mentioned, and we certainly do our fair share of that. But there's also the blame strategy, which is a bit like having knee or elbow pain and then turning to you, coming home from the doctor and saying, "I'm divorcing you because I feel elbow pain or I feel knee pain." Like most people would consider that ludicrous, that the functional pain in their joint would come from a spouse. But we have bought this idea that these other kinds of pain are sourced outside of us. So our two favorite ways of dealing with it are ignore it or blame someone else for it. And neither of those actually offer any solution.
I'm unhappy and I want a divorce. We're not responsible for her happiness.
Well, and that can go both ways, right?
Both ways. Both ways.
Definitely both ways.
And how often do we see in situations like that the person's still unhappy post-divorce? Very common, because if they don't work on themselves and self-source and
wherever you go, there you are, right? So you carry the problem travels.
Most people, I mean, some people really are exercised by the process. I don't think divorce is a solution. I think it's a conclusion, ideally, meaning if you're unhappy and you get divorced, you probably will stay unhappy because that is to see your partner as the source of your pain rather than your own insides. But you might go through a tremendous amount of work, come to a place where you are happy, you feel whole, and your conclusion is, this marriage does not serve myself or this other person. And people are going to hear that and think that that's what we promote or something. We don't tell people what their marital status should be. And many of us, myself included, are long, decades long married people. So we value marriage, but I'm just saying that because a man whose marriage is in crisis or a man who's feeling like I need to get a divorce might be really irritated to hear some of the stuff we're saying, because he's bought into this idea that there's no way out of his emotional pain other than coming out of his marriage. And I would warn a guy like that, the statistics do not favor your conclusions. And our experience doesn't either, meaning those kind of men will find momentarily a new season of happiness because they'll find somebody else to hold all of those places they've disowned, and they'll think, oh, I have finally found the perfect woman. And again, after a short while, they'll start feeling the same insecurities again, the same uncertainty. Does she really mean it? Why is she looking at her phone like that? She's pretty dialed up tonight. She says she's going out with girlfriends. Is that really true? And a man will start feeling all of that dread because he never addressed the places of himself he disowned.
By the way, this is a human condition, right? Not a male condition.
This is not a male thing. This is
Female
not a male
condition.
thing.
This is a human condition. So simultaneously recognize that if we're disowning part of ourself, right, rejecting part of ourself, not accepting, not caring for, not loving ourself, right, not valuing, not understanding our worth, right. If we're doing all of those things in a relationship, it's very likely that the other person is as well.
Well, I don't think I've ever seen it otherwise. That's what creates enmeshment. Charlie, I'll use you and Jill, right? Here, honey, hold these 200 things about me that I reject. Right. And she says, okay, well, you hold these 200 about me that I reject. And now you have this weird relationship where you're like managing each other's insides. We could call that codependency. We could call it enmeshment. We could call it dependency. It doesn't matter. There's no path to a healthy relationship that way because you're constantly trying to dance around and negotiate your way away from gridlock. But you will come to gridlock when everybody has equal pain. Because then you have like a gun at each other's head in a standoff saying, I'll change when you change. And the other person is saying the same thing and also just resenting how they feel and what's being asked of them. And that's where marriage runs out of runway when you're in that spot. And though it is a human problem, it's my opinion and experience that someone needs to go first in breaking that gridlock. And when a woman has to do that, she will generally go through that and then say, okay, I want to be with a man who has the intestinal and testicular fortitude to be first next time, no matter what her political ideology. Most women want to feel like they were led by a man who did not push her out into the dark living room with the burglar noises first, right? And so that happens emotionally as well in the relationship, where if the relationship is in a gridlock, somebody needs to go first. It doesn't tend to end well if the woman goes first because she will generally conclude, I'm going to be better off with another man. Whereas when a man goes first, it creates this kind of a potentially and most often a harmonious process where he realizes, oh man, I gotta take care of my insides. He does so, he becomes emotionally safe, which means he starts to differentiate from his partner. He says, I gotta own me. I gotta take care of these unhealed places that I've disowned. And as he becomes whole, he can hold space for his partner. He can create an emotionally safe space where she can do the same in a place that feels safe. Now, they both have the same kind of work to do, but again, somebody's got to do it first. A lot of people try to make this happen at the exact same time. I'm not a fan of that. I'm not a professional marriage counselor. I'm not a professional therapist. I just help guys with this kind of conflict. And usually if they're trying to do like this mediated, like, okay, I'm going to go 1%. Now you go 1%. I'm going to go another 1%. You go 1%.
Yeah. You know, for guys who are technical, maybe listening to this, right? Maybe in technology or whatever, even in politics, right? There's this word called protocol, right? Protocols. There's how things are done, and how things are done effectively, efficiently, to produce to produce a known result. You know, there's a protocol of things, and information, especially from a technical perspective, information has to be sent in a certain form. It's got to be said, to a certain endpoint. It's got to be information has to be moved back and forth in a certain way. And unfortunately, we're not machines, right? We're not vending machines. It's one thing for you and I to sit in a room and pass information back and forth to each other. But a lot of times in a conversation, especially with a woman, there is metadata, right? There's extra little bits of information riding on the signal, right? There's not just the words that she's saying, but how she feels when she says the words, right? When she pulls those words up. And a man can have this as well, right? He can, especially if he's pressed down and suppressed information, right? Feelings about things, hasn't really shared his truth. There can be a bubble of emotion, right? Almost like a juicy burp, right? Of expression that comes out when he wants to share his truth with her. He's got words, but he also has feelings that kind of come up with that, like bile, right? And so this exchange, this transfer of information, right? Is it clean? It's not. I can't say to someone, "Hey, you hurt me," right? Or what you did, I didn't like, without the other person being defensive, without the other person taking it personally, without the other person, right? Like seeing things from their frame of reference. Oh yeah, well you didn't do this, right? So now you, like you say, you get back and forth. It's almost like one person throws up and then the other person throws up, and then pretty soon you're just kind of throwing up on each other, right?
Yeah, everybody. Yeah.
It's just gross, right? So at some point, what we encourage men to do is to come into a community of men like mentoring men, be able to talk these things out, right? Be able to let themselves be seen, be able to own parts of themselves, right? To really say, hey, hold on, right? I've actually been rejecting myself. I actually have been rejecting my needs, my hurts, my anything, and work that out with the guys, right? Be able to work that out with men who are not romantically involved with you, who are not relationally involved with you in some sort of long-term relationship where you have to worry about the other person leaving, and then be able to get to that point where you're healthy enough where you can be able to go back to your wife, your partner, and be able to say, hey. I'm going to give you, basically, not in these words, right? But I'm going to give you the opportunity to purge. I'm going to give you the opportunity to throw up, right? And I'm going to hold the trash can, and I'm not going to take anything you say personally, right? I'm going to recognize that you have emotional toxins in you that have festered, and that the only way you're going to heal is if you purge them, if you get them out, right? And so I'm going to give, as the man, I'm going to go first, right? As in, I'm going to take care of me, and then I'm going to be able to turn around and take care of this other person. Almost like if you went out on the town and drank a little too much, and she needs to throw up, you're going to hold her hair, you're going to rub her back, right? You're going to encourage her to let it go, right? To get it out. And you're not going to take any of that personally. You're just going to care for her in that process.
I got a visual for this, that for the guys who might think this way. I think that way. And Charlie, you and I, as former IT guys, kind of go this route. I like to think about it that my wife's communication always has, well, when it's intense, has pain. It has her analysis of why she's in pain and her strategy for what would make her pain go away. Now, this is a way a man would look at communication. All I'm hearing is I'm getting the intense emotion from my wife, and I'm getting her stories about why she's in pain and what would fix it. But here's what used to happen to me is when my wife would talk about her pain, I would get laser focused on her story about why it happened and her strategy to fix it, and it would trigger my pain up here. I always run out of markers on these stupid calls, man. So I would get like super sucked into my pain from what she was saying about why she was in pain and what would fix it. This is actually just the drama triangle, by the way. And so then I would respond with my own sense of pain and my analysis and strategy, which then would trigger her pain. And then here we are, we're in gridlock. You got two people who are like trying to out vomit each other. And this is what it felt like. It would be exasperating getting these conversations. So what I experienced, and what, just for guys watching who aren't familiar with mentoring men, what we show guys how to do is take their pain and address it in the context of men who are not triggered by their pain. So like when a man comes into our community and we accept that he's in pain, that's part of the human journey. When he shares it with us, we're not taking any of it personally. And so we give him the space to like be seen without judgment, to be accepted, the things he's looking for temporarily. He has to ultimately accept himself, but we can offer him this environment where he has this. Then he can start to address this pain. And I'm going to put another P back there. He could be present, and he can replace he can learn to be empathetic and compassionate. And now when she's emoting, he can just like, oh, okay, wow, you sound like you're in a lot of pain, because all of the stories coming out of her mouth, which are always going to be filled with blame, they're going to be filled with hurt. That's how we are when we're emoting in pain. We say stuff that's not true. And when you're insecure because you're trying to protect and defend the places you've disowned that person is responsible for, you feel like you enter like a combative state. And then you lose in the relationship because you're not actually present for your partner. You switch your focus to defending and standing up for yourself as though you need it. And now you've made the whole interaction about you, which is why women notoriously say in these circumstances, you always make everything about you. I used to say, I'm making it about me, because everything you're saying is about me. And it would blow my mind that a woman would say this. I'd be like, how would I make it about anything else? Everything you're saying has my name in it. And I didn't realize just the way women communicate, the metadata, the data. The metadata is the important part. That's the emotional pain. And when I dealt with my own pain, and this is the experience men have in our community who go through this, they learn to they don't set their pain aside. They learn to honor that in its own place, address it, so that when they hear their partner's pain, that's what they're primarily hearing. They're not hearing their fear, their anxiety, their potential loss. They're not feeling defensive. They're not feeling triggered, because all of that stuff comes from our own insecurities.
Yeah, the phrase I like is hear her pain, not her blame. Right.
That's a great, yeah.
I mean, we got to be able to hear her pain, because if all we hear is the blame, then what happens is our pain gets so loud, right? Like if you're in a room with music that's so loud, it's such a sensory overload that we can't even see that she's upset anymore, right? All we know is that we're being attacked in our mind, right? That we're being attacked, and we want to get away from it. We want to get away from her.
And we're historically bigger, we have more intensity. And so when men show up that way too, and I don't think we appreciate this, because we don't feel like we're in like a major rage, but to the woman in our life, we're like DEFCON 0. Like it's off the Richter scale anger, because just the difference in attunement, right? Like I started to really understand this with daughters, who, like, my first half of my 6 kids were boys and my second half daughters. And my daughters were like really revelatory to me to see, like, whoa, girls have a different sensitivity. I didn't feel like I was all that worked up, but to my daughter it was like a devastatingly big deal. And
tone matters.
That a man can actually relate to this, right? Because what you're talking about, right, is that whatever we think whatever DEFCON we're at, right, she thinks we're 10x that, because that's how it feels to her, right? So for a man, he actually has experienced this, right? But he's experienced it in the conference room. He's experienced it in the garage. He's experienced it in the work bay, right? Where he's talking with his coworkers and he's like, "Hey, how was your weekend?" And they're like, "Yeah, we went fishing," or the kids had a ball game or whatever, right? And then the boss comes in and the boss is pissed, right? He is not good. He's had his ass chewed by his boss and now it's all rolling downhill, right? And when he walks up, everybody gets quiet. Everybody, right? Parts of their body get watertight. And he's like, uh-oh, right? Something's up. The boss may not even have said anything yet, and yet the room has changed.
Yeah, we definitely know what fear is like. But I know this, we talk to a lot of guys who are experiencing this. They feel like they're not being necessarily intense, but their wife is calling them things that are starting to concern them. She feels like they're being violent, that she's not safe. And then this triggers another round of pain in a man. What do you mean I'm not safe?
I've never heard.
I've never heard her. Yeah, I've never even called her a name. And I used to wear that as such a badge. I have never touched my wife in a physically harmful way. And I have never in 32 years called her a name. And I used to think that was a badge of honor. But, my wife would still tell you that she felt tremendously bullied at times, that she felt unsafe. I didn't know at the time, but I was using just my ability to maybe have a superior argument. I was still showing up in a way that would get her to retreat. And that's not a kind way to be in a relationship. Now, we talk to plenty of men who the wife is the one doing this. This is not unique to men by any means, but we talk to men who we help as men. But it creates this whole cascade. And I would bring all this back to disowning. It's all caused by two people who have disowned themselves. And so if you want to have a prosperous, deeply connected, passionate, intimate, fulfilling, and satisfying marriage for decades, you have to address where you have disowned yourself. It's the beginning of the shift in marriage. And I would promote the idea, because we're talking to men, that when men go first, it creates good things in that regard. And I'm not saying in charge. That's not what I mean. But when a man says, I'm going to look at my pain first, I'm not going to hold anybody else responsible. I'm not going to create a prerequisite that my wife address her pain, because I got to deal with my pain one way or the other. She could get hit by a bus. I still have my disowned spaces. And I got to look at that. And the sooner a man starts giving that attention, like deep attention,
well,
the sooner he has the life he wants.
Here's the thing: is we don't see ourselves, right? We're on the inside looking out. We don't see how our thoughts impact our body language, our way of being, our voice inflection, our posture, right? Like just when we're in a low state, when we're believing negative things about ourselves, when we feel hopeless, powerless, dependent, right? All of these victimized, all these other things, then we kind of walk around with a little slump, right? We're not quite as much energy. We don't really feel good. We kind of feel, we don't have any pep, right? And this is the version of us that everybody around us gets. But when we know our value and worth, when we're connected with ourselves, when we feel good about ourselves, right? We walk a little taller. We walk with a little pep in our step. We walk, right? We interact. We smile. We say, "Hey, how are you?" Right? We show interest in others. Like it's a different, that everybody around us gets that version of us as well, right? And so a lot of times what'll happen is, to your point, when a man starts changing his thoughts about himself, right? When he stops rejecting himself, when he starts accepting parts of himself and being honest about who he is and what he wants and where he's going, and he starts meeting his own needs. He starts to feel good about himself, and then magically, people around him start to act differently, right? They start to smile and they start to, right, have a different way of being because they're experiencing a different version of him, right? He's not controlling them, he's not manipulating them, but he is influencing them, right? He is part of their
Of course, yeah,
environment.
And
yeah. I
that's
mean,
the dirty little secret of the community. We don't help men save their marriages. We help men save themselves. And the byproduct of that is often we've seen men whose marriages look like there's no hope. And now they're happily married.
yeah, it's interesting. It's oftentimes the ones that look like they have no hope that turn around, and the ones that didn't look especially at risk that you're like, whoa, where did that come from? And they go sideways. But really, I'm curious about your feedback, fellas. I would say there's a pretty definitive correlation in the men that we serve between their willingness to look inside and the end result. Meaning that's a common denominator. The guy that stays fixated on changes in other people, I've never seen such a man move through things and have a great life.
Yeah, there's absolutely the word that I've come to appreciate is curiosity. He must possess a curiosity about himself, right? He must possess a curiosity
Yeah.
about his own thoughts, how he feels about those thoughts, how those thoughts make him feel, what he wants for himself in his life, what behaviors he's engaged in. Like what are the fruits of his thinking and
Yeah. Yeah.
his reaction to his own feelings. If he doesn't have a curiosity about that, then he's always going to blame somebody else. Somebody else is always going to be responsible for his woes, and we know for sure, 100%. I mean, if you think about it, it's not even hard to understand. Something either in life, change happens through something outside of you happening, a death, a divorce, a birth, a layoff, an economic downturn, an earthquake, or something happens, something changes inside of you, right? You have a different perspective, you have a different set of thoughts, you have different beliefs. You go inside and take a look at some of those rooms that you've closed off over the last, many decades of your life, and you go, oh, there's some crayons in here. Oh,
Yeah.
I haven't seen those in a long time.
That
I should probably see, like, what's going on there.
you need all those places to live the life you want, and it took me forever to figure out how to disown myself. I think part of this process that's worth noting is that because guys always want to know how, and though we would love to walk them through that in a 1 hour live YouTube, that's just not feasible. And we're happy to share that with men in complimentary calls. But to give a guy a little bit of a tidbit, the first thing you have to discover is what is the scale that you use to disown yourself. Because like we all learn in our education and our experiences growing up, we learn like the proper way to measure and judge. And what we don't realize is whatever scales and measures you have used to measure you your whole life, the same ones that resulted in you disowning whole huge swaths of yourself, those are the exact same scales you use to measure others. And so I think this is another reason, this is why I want to bring it up, Charlie, is you're measuring, you were talking about when you change your insides, it improves your relationships. I would attribute that largely to when you realize you used all of these really ineffective scales for measuring, yourself, and those measures and scales or weights and measures produced a persistent judgment that you suck. That's what caused you to disown yourself. Well, you're measuring the people in your life that you apparently love by your harsh standards. So we naturally talk to a lot of perfectionists. We talk to people with extremely high standards. I mean, it might be easy to watch something like this and hear that we're talking about guys facing divorce and thinking we're talking about a bunch of guys that beat their wives and spend all the time in the bars. We're talking about people that are like leaders in society and business, captains of industry, special forces in the military, law enforcement,
Doctors.
highly professional, successful, overachieving people tend to be this. And because those, they oftentimes became that way by driving themselves with this harsh whip. But they also do that to the people they love. And so they feel accepted, approved, appreciated, respected everywhere but the bedroom, their kitchen table, right? Because that judgment of self will manifest itself in judgment of other people around you. It's really easy not to judge a coworker you see once a week, but somebody who's in your space, your home, who's your partner, you're going to judge them as harshly as you judge you. And so the work begins with learning all the ways you've judged and disowned yourself and reintegrating those parts by relaxing the judgment. Because the judgments we made, to your point early in the call, Charlie, was it was not fair, first of all, and it was based on poor interpretation of like what we knew about life as a 7-year-old or 8-year-old or 6-year-old. And when you start to change that judgment, you start to rehome parts of you that you had disowned. And that's a slow process. Slow being like, guys can make significant strides in this in 6 to 12 months, where they're feeling great because they know how to find those lost parts of themselves, reawaken and accept them, and then live from them. And the more you do that, it's like every new bit of ground you get on your insides is new ground you have in your relationship. Because if I relax my judgment about me, my judgment about you is relaxed. And this is what I would attribute to the huge uptick in good, positive marriage outcomes, is that you're letting go of the harsh judgment that you have for your partner. And that's sexy, right? Like it is deeply connecting to stop judging people. And so really, I would say all connection problems are judgment problems.
Yeah, it's hard to imagine, right? But simultaneously we go, I'm mad at you. Come here.
No, come here.
Yeah.
Let's have some sexy time.
Yeah.
Wait.
Right.
What's the old letter? Dear lover, you disappoint me. Let's have sex. Signed, your loving husband. Right.
You just described how most men, live for 2 or 3 stages of their marriage, and then they can't figure out what's going on.
And the bonus that is universal is men who do this work will report have such better relationships with my kids. Because again, the same judgment issue. We don't realize we're even doing it to them. And it all softens.
Yeah, I thought I had good relationships with my kids. I didn't. Just like I thought I was a great man because everybody told me that. And I was telling a friend today, no, I was a C average guy who thought he was an A+ man. But I was deceived this way. Anyway, this last week, my wife has been gone for about a week to be with a family member in another part of the country who, because her uncle passed away. And I'm just tickled to death with my girls. My sons I'm tickled to death with too, but they don't live here, right? So my girls have been just owning the whole thing. We spend 95% of our time just laughing together and talking about our insides. My 13-year-old is reading, some of the books that we use in our work and understanding it. And so we're having conversations, and she's like kind of finding herself stepping into a drama triangle, for example, and she'll stop herself and she'll like practice some needs literacy and get clear about, hey, I'm having an internal experience. It's not about my sisters or you. And she'll correct herself. And I was like, man, I have a tremendous amount of harmony in my family. You guys have been here, so you know what that's like. firsthand. And I wouldn't have any of that, none of it, had I not tended to my own heart, the disowned places. And that was the journey of, like, a million miles. It felt like a million miles away, but it was actually just, nanometers away the whole time. I just needed people to show me, like, that's your issue. And lots of people tried.
It's a
But
short journey, especially compared to the decades where, right, we were kind of walking around in circles and going back over the same path.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I wasted so much time.
yeah, same.
Now, I mean, I don't think anything is wasted in reality. I just assume I needed life to go that way. But I'm really pleased that, our kids, our sons, younger men, because we're starting to get a lot of younger men in our community, like, they have an opportunity to kind of, like, re-own these disowned places way earlier than we did. We talked to guys even into their 70s, sometimes close to 80, and they're struggling this way. Side note, a lot of people hear mentoring and they think we just work with young people, but most people we work with, what's the median age?
45 to 55.
45 to 55.
45 to 55, yeah. But most people are like, oh, you work with, like, young guys. Well, yeah, we're starting to a little bit now, but most guys are, like, pretty close to being able to get the senior citizen discount at Denny's. So I have a lot of optimism about this, like, to see people reintegrate these parts of themselves. I believe it's necessary for culture, society, and re-owning yourself, man. It's like,
and it's one of the reasons we now have free courses available for men in the community to help them, whether it's with a failing marriage, whether it's finding some of their 4 core key coordinates, grounding themselves, or dealing with a sexless marriage, because the change has to start within. So I'm assuming, but there'll be a link somewhere below.
I just added one, by the way, today. I just added one for the man whose wife has stopped wearing her wedding ring. That's something guys reach out about. And hopefully by the end of the week or next week, we'll have one specifically for the man who's heard, I need space. What do you do with that statement? What does that even mean? And we want to put these things out in the world for free so that men can start to understand how that stuff relates to disowning, because it's not going to be immediately apparent, and we're not going to try to show guys that right away. But if that content resonates, we have a lot more to give. That's just the free stuff.
Yeah, well, because here's the thing: is she doesn't have a secret owner's manual either, right? She doesn't have all of his answers. He wants answers. He wants clarity. He wants certainty, right? He wants the pain to go away, but she doesn't have all of his answers, and believing that she's somehow holding out, right, is really causing frustration and resentment and pain. So take some of these courses, start getting surfacing some of the answers for yourself, and let's have some conversations about what's going on, because a lot of times we can't even hear our own self, right? We can't see ourselves, we can't hear ourselves, and it takes having a conversation with someone else, all right, another man, someone who is able to understand you and understand where you are and be able to say, is that true? This is what I hear, and be able to just ask questions so that you can surface your answers for yourself.
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
What are some of the coolest conversations you've had like that lately with men? I know that's putting you on the spot because you talk to men every day, but
yeah, I have a lot of conversations, so I'm just trying to isolate down to one. And I think that the most recent conversation is this exact conversation, right? This exact sort of like, the conversation that I was having with him was where he was relating a story about how he felt like he was hurt by something that someone had said. And so we kind of took a moment to discuss the concept of, what were you hurt by what she said, or were you hurt by your thoughts about what she said? Because we experience our feelings about our thoughts, but because something outside of us happened that was maybe triggering or the stimulus for that, we tend to blame that external thing, right? We say things like, you hurt me, you upset me. Right?
You made me XYZ.
Yeah. Right. And we know this, we know even further that this is true because sometimes it's not what they do, it's what they don't do. Right? So we will come up with a whole story in our head about what someone should or shouldn't have done, and then be upset about it. A lot of times what will happen is a man will actually start to have conversations in his head with a person who's not even in the room, and then he'll get all pissed off about it, right? He'll get super upset. He'll get himself worked up into a lather, and then by the time he actually does get that person in front of him, he's already primed, right, to confirm whatever it is that he believes about how things are going to go. That's confirmation bias, right? So
you just described 30 years of my life, by the way.
Me too, right? And the insidious thing about this is that we want to lay down at night and go to sleep, but our brain is noisy, right? We have this ruminating brain, and we've actually trained it to do that, right? By running simulations, by having all of these imagined conversations that aren't even really happening with people who aren't even in the room, right? So it's that kind of those types of being able to help a man see himself and say, okay, what's really going on here, right? Where did that story come from? Did she actually say that? Is that true, right? Is that actually helping or hindering your relationship? Is that helping or hindering your relationship with yourself?
So today's quote of the day was from Churchill. When I look back on all these worries, I remember the story of the old man who said on his deathbed that he had a lot of trouble in his life, most of which has never happened.
Yeah.
She did this. It means that.
Mark Twain has something similar to that, right? Yeah. He says a lot of terrible things I've experienced a lot of terrible things in my life, and some of them have actually happened to me.
Yeah. Yeah, very much the case. When I find, it's kind of a self-diagnostic thing I use now, is like if I find myself ruminating on the future, a time that is not now about a person that is not me. That's kind of my two-pronged approach. If I'm there, I'm experiencing myself, and probably evidence, interestingly, of a place that I've disowned, that I need to tend to a little bit, because we tend to fixate on outside anywhere we're not willing to look inside, right? Yeah. Because we say, well, the answer's out there because it's not in here.
Yeah, that's definitely a tool I want a man to take away from this call if he's listened this long, is that anytime that we're experiencing feelings, right? So a lot of times, Sven, you will call them hard emotions, right? Hard feelings. That's a sign. That's a signal. That's a flare that's being shot off. It's not something to be avoided or dismissed or pushed down. It's actually something to be curious. There's that word again. Curious about. To be like, what's that? Where'd that come from? Just a moment ago I was fine. Now I'm bothered. What happened? What was I thinking? What took place just before this moment, right? To really kind of get curious, because if we'll pay attention to that, it's actually something that'll lead us back to, right? Something where we can rehome, like you say, part of ourselves.
Yeah, for sure. I love my emotions this way now. And what a tough time to grow up as men, though, in the last few hundred years, because we've been systematically told, stuff them, ignore them, don't trust them. And just to clarify, we're not talking about being emotional heaping mess on the floor as a man. We're talking about learning to experience your emotions without being ruled by them, without being led by them, but also without stuffing, disowning, dishonoring, and like cutting this part of us off as though it's a bad thing. I wouldn't run around in a really important vehicle that had all of the indicators disabled. But that's how men have been told to live. They've been told, like, don't you dare let these parts of you be. And it's no wonder we have the fruit from this. We have men die way earlier than women, and for lots of reasons, but I would suggest a lot of it is their emotional health.
Rest.
They're more likely to commit suicide. They're more likely to be killed in violent crime. Like the stats, and listen, I'm not saying anything antagonistic to women here. I'm just saying, like, it's a hard time to be a man when it comes to your insides, because like we're getting squeezed and squeezed and squeezed. And the one thing that we have that should allow us to have the insight into what's going on and how to address it, we've told men to completely look away from it, which is your emotions. We've called that the domain of women, which is a complete nonsense. And so men have like the one tool they need, they leave out of their toolbox. And yet we're trying to do these, really substantial things in the world. And that's coming home to roost. So we're very keen on emotional well-being, but in a way, I think most men would be really pleased, meaning, we're not talking about a bunch of soft people that just sit around in a circle and cry. And I'm not against any of those things. It's just a matter of when men are so used to associating emotions with that they don't understand the power that you have in your emotions. Now, I want to plug a little bit of a course here, because I realize getting in touch with us and signing up for a deeper mentoring work is a scary thing. But one way you could explore this at a lightweight level, we do have a course called The Emotionally Resilient Man. Probably takes, what do you think, 3 days to go through. It's not very heavy. There is a cost for that. That one's not free because it's a little bit more involved. But it's a great way to explore some of our concepts about emotions, how to use them, with really a fairly low commitment as far as resources. And they could still ask questions and dialogue with us in a much more low-key way.
So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a link in the description to all of our courses. There's going to be a place there where you can see all the courses that we have available: the Failing Marriage Recovery Plan, the Emotionally Resilient Man, the 4 coordinates that you're talking about, right? There's even a course out there for menopause and things like that, so that you can understand better what's going on with your wife in a certain season of life, right? So these are the types of things that we talk about. We'll put a link to that into the description. I think today's been an excellent call, guys. I really appreciate the discussion and the insights and the analogies and the relating and all of that sort of stuff. Like you said earlier, Sven, this isn't really something that ends here, right? Right. We want to leave the man with an invitation to a conversation to explore these concepts more deeply. And you can find more information about that over on mentoring.men. Everything will be linked in the description. We'll be back here next Wednesday at 2 p.m. to continue having these types of discussions and that sort of thing. So be sure to come back here next Wednesday live. Join us for that conversation, and check out all the other conversations that we had. Check out last week's conversation about
lots of
front end alignment and wearing in parts of your life, and being sure that you address issues when they arise.
I'd love to hear from men too in the comments. Like, what would they like us to talk about?
Yeah,
right? We can get kind of philosophical. I would love topic suggestions. Even in the live comments, if we have such a thing. I'm willing to talk about anything.
Yeah, let's bring it. And just bring your suggestions. Let's see what we've got, and then we'll
roll with it.
You'll roll with it, yeah. All right, guys, let's leave it there. It's good hanging out with you. Thanks for being here, and we'll see you guys next week.